Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted to have my friend Yasuhiko back, and we are going to be continuing the series on the new spirituality for the future. Yasuhiko, what are we doing today?
Good morning. So this is the fifth in the series of New Spirituality of the Future. And last time we spoke about the crisis of consciousness. And today we will talk about possible new philosophy, cosmology, and ethics that are required for the breakthrough in consciousness, and also that will come into existence as we go through this breakthrough in consciousness. And let me start this session with Buckminster Fuller's quote from his Critical Path, which was published in 1981, just before his passing. And the second book I read after Synergetics 1 and 2. And it is long, so I'm going to shorten it. Sometimes he writes one sentence goes beyond one page, So this is from the beginning part of the Critical Path. Humanity is moving ever deeper into crisis, a crisis without precedent. It is a crisis brought about by cosmic evolution, irrevocably intent upon completely transforming disintegrated humanity into a completely integrated, comprehensively interconsiderate, harmonious whole. Humanity is moving ever deeper into crisis, a crisis without precedent. It is a crisis brought about by cosmic evolution, irrevocably intent upon completely transforming disintegrated humanity into a completely integrated, comprehensively interconsiderate, harmonious whole. And this crisis without precedent that is brought about by cosmic evolution, which Bucky wrote about, cannot be fully understood without understanding the interior dimension of the crisis. The investigation and understanding of the interior dimension of the crisis is missing in Buckminster Fuller's Critical Path and all of his work, actually. The interior dimension of the crisis is what I call the crisis of consciousness. And this crisis was brought about by three factors. Number one, the qualitatively increasing complexification of the civilization. Second, the qualitatively increasing estrangement and alienation of the human life from nature. And number three, the loss of interiority or of the connection to spirituality from human knowledge and consciousness. So the evolutionary stress that we are experiencing was caused by the tension created by the external changes and the internal evolutionary drive. And something like this happened many times, actually, in the last 2.5 million years of humans existing on this planet. There's a book called A Mind So Rare by Martin Donald. he really beautifully describes the entire process of evolution of human consciousness and how the culture and language played its role. So I highly recommend people to read this. And I'm not going to talk about this, but this is an important book. And we have been in the third stage of major transformation or evolution. And last time we really had a revolution was the time that Carl Jaspers called the Axial Age. And Julian Jaynes described as the breakdown of the bicameral mind from which new mode of consciousness originated. We don't want to talk about this at this moment. There's so many things to talk about. But you see, the new possibility and the potential that was opened up through the origination of consciousness was rationality, individuality, and this worldliness exemplified by Aristotle, and more purely by Epicurus. So when consciousness, new mode of consciousness originated through the breakdown of the bicameral mind, new possibility and new potential became available for humans to explore in its eternal, sempiternal quest for evolution. And the new potential that came into existence, in my view, Aristotle and more purely Epicurus represented rationality, individuality, and this worldliness. And whenever something like this happens, there's always a reactionary movement. And so the reactionary readoption and readaptation of the bicameral mind after the origination of new consciousness, ecological consciousness, was rationalized external authority, collectivism as opposed to individualism, and otherworldliness, exemplified by Plato. And today, we are in the midst of the crisis of consciousness that began in the late 18th or the early 19th century, where the innate drive for evolution meet the increasing complexity of life reality. And so those 3 centuries, the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, are the period of increasing crisis of consciousness, wherein the ecological consciousness has been experiencing breakdown and new consciousness is abounding with the pains of birth experienced by both the mother, which is the human race, and the baby, each individual. And just before this crisis really became manifest, Renaissance took place. You see, what happened is after the birth of new consciousness and vestige of bicameral mind rationalized by Platonistic and Christian theology took over, and Dark Ages came. And not the essence of Christianity, I'm saying it's an organized, exoteric form of Christianity. And the external authority, God concept, and institution built around the God concept, Catholic Church, became decadent, hypertrophied, and interfered with every aspect of human life around the 15th century. At that time, revolutionary movement took place in the human consciousness, and that is what we call the Renaissance. The artists and the philosophers, the creative minority of people, reclaimed the potential and possibility inherent in the mode of consciousness that was born, that originated 3,000 years ago from our perspective. And that is Renaissance. And that led to the Age of Reason, Age of Enlightenment, Scientific Revolution, and American Revolution. But then immediately after this Renaissance took place, there was a reactionary movement, which we call Reformation. It was not transformation, it was a reformation. Reform, meaning not the function itself, but the form is form. They reform the external form through which the vestige of a bicameral mind has been imposed upon humans again. So Reformation was a reactionary to the Renaissance. That was a revolutionary. And later on I talk about this, but today the same thing is happening. There's a revolutionary, like a new Renaissance taking place, but at the same time there's a reactionary movement taking place. Every time revolution happens, there's a reactionary. And so far, reactionary movement became more predominant. So challenge is to actually go through this. And in a way, evolution requires counter-revolutionary movement. Evolution, the process of evolution contains within it the evolutionary movement. Otherwise, there is no self-overcoming. That's why flowers fall in attachment and weeds grow in dislike. It's always the case. Becoming becomes overcoming, and if there's an overcoming, there's always something that needs to be overcome. So in a sense, evolution requires the evolutionary force and what we call evil. The key is let not the evolutionary force take over the process of evolution. So Renaissance was an extremely important development in the evolution of human consciousness, which brought about the blossoming of the Age of Reason and blossoming of the new mode of consciousness that was born around 500 BC. So today we have Renaissance and then also the Reformation movement going on. And Nietzsche says something brilliant here in his Joyous Science. God is dead, but given the ways of man, perhaps for millennia to come, there will be caves in which his shadow will be shown. Now, Nietzsche was not against Christ, the essence of Christianity, or Buddha, but he was extremely critical of Christianity, what I call churchianity, that came into existence as an institution. So when he said God is dead, the God that he said was dead was this bicameral mode of thinking where you see that you become dependent on the external authority. And all of the traditions that and the institutions that are built upon this external authority God concept, instead of claiming the internal authority and the inner God, so Zarathustra reclaimed that. And we always want to pay attention to this reactionary movement, without but also within. And so what is the possibility of new consciousness? Last time we went deeper, so I don't want to repeat this, about the limitation of ecological mind. And I want to focus a little more on the trans-ecological mind, which will come into existence along with the birth of new consciousness. So new consciousness will have a number of additional features to the consciousness that we have today. One is the trans-paradigmatic way of knowing and thinking. And therefore, one can be multi-perspectival. You not only understand different perspectives, you can also create different perspectives within your own consciousness. And being trans-paradigmatic means that you can actually ontologically immerse yourself into a different paradigm to understand different way of thinking and culture. Therefore, it is also multi-logical. The ecological mind and rational mode of consciousness that has been developed in the last 3,000 years, which was exemplified by Aristotle, was actually monological, Aristotelian logical, the binary logic of Aristotle. And in the last century, especially, number of mathematicians and logicians began to see the limitation of this monological Aristotelian Boolean logic. So Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem and quantum paradoxes in physics show the limitations of the dualistic binary logic. So we are moving from the exclusive logic, the logic of exclusion, to the logic of inclusion. So the choice paradigmatic mind uses logic, which is much more expansive, multidimensional, and it can include what can be considered as contradiction based on Aristotelian logic. And Aristotelian logic will become a special case. It is not invalidated, but it has become a special case of the larger scheme of things. And number of examples. P.D. Ouspensky's tertium organum, he actually logically codified the logic inherent in ancient teachings. And then Alexander Grothendieck came up with this geometrical logic. Stefan Lupasco came up with this quantum logic. And Buckminster came up with this synergetic logic. Those are all much more expansive and inclusive than Aristotelian logic. So to understand different paradigm, being transparadigmatic, you need to be able to think in different way, which means your logic will follow that different way of thinking. You introduced me to Louis Sullivan, which the more I actually knew only one sentence. And just being with the sentence, I got so much out of it. I haven't really read anything besides, you sent me something and I don't want to read it, but the form ever follows function. This is like a harbinger of a new kind of logic. And I said to you after I learned this, functions do not exist in isolation from the whole, even as the text do not exist in isolation from the context, while the whole is the ever-changing and moving dynamic of functions and is in itself a form of generating function within a larger whole. And the recognition or the determination of the whole itself is also an epistemic function. So Louis Sullivan's law that form ever follows function corresponds to the Buddhist and Nietzschean realization of the primacy of becoming over being. Function is a species of becoming. So being ever follows becoming as form ever follows function. So in this whole context, if we were to define logic, logic is the category of conceptual harmonics or pattern integrities, which are forms of thought and imagination that underlie the perceptual experience of their beauty. In terms of function and form, thinking is a function and logic is a form. Therefore, logic ever follows thinking. Logic is a category of the conceptual harmonics or pattern integrities of thought and imagination that underlie the perceptual experience of their beauty. In terms of function and form, thinking is a function and logic is a form. Therefore, logic ever follows thinking. It's very, very important here. So this is a taking from Sullivan's remarkable insight. We can see this is like a creating a foundation for new science, new philosophy, new cosmology, and actually new ethics. Beautiful. So now today's subject of new cosmology, new philosophy, and new ethics. So we must build a new science and cosmology from the ground up, taking into account all of the discoveries and theories made thus far. We need to be a camel. We need to really study all of the science and understand what came before us. But then we still need to build entire new science. Trying to put together quantum physics and relativity theory may not succeed. We need to go somewhere beneath, being very informed by those theories. And James Jaynes says, science is an attempt at setting in order the facts of experience. We need to go back to the experience. People studying theories theories and theories and trying to combine them. Maybe we may have to expand our consciousness and reground science in different place. And look at the relativity and the quantum physics from that perspective. So we must re-examine the philosophical assumptions upon which science is built. Both relativity and quantum theories are partial theories, as yet to be unified, but share the fundamental materialist philosophical assumptions. What is required for the new science is the elimination of the demarcation between the physical and the metaphysical, and founding of science and scientific theories upon a monistic philosophical ground. And Louis Sullivan's function be more primary than form really has amazing insight, is amazingly insightful. Function is not material. Form is material. And it really gets to actually the place where Walter Russell built his cosmology. So fundamental new philosophical foundation that I suggest for new science and new cosmology is actually not new. It's always there are some super geniuses that come before us, sometimes 300-400 years prior. And this one, this is my word, is monistic pan-dynamism. Monistic pan-dynamism, and originally identified by Roger Joseph Bošković in 18th century. And this monistic pan-dynamism, the foundation goes beyond demarcation between physics and metaphysics. Something like function is the massless, no mass, massless force is the fundamental elementary substance and the ever-present first cause of reality, nature, universe, and cosmos. And I'm going to unpack this a little more. But let me share with you this man, Roger Joseph Bošković. To me, it is one of the greatest scientific geniuses ever. His father was Serbian. So before Nikola Tesla, we had this Bošković, another super genius from my wife's country. Although he was born in Dubrovnik, and he considered himself a Dalmatian. And he was a Jesuit priest and educated in Rome and lived in Rome for most of his life. His mother was Italian. So he was born in 1711. So he was 6 years old when Leibniz died, and 16 years old when Newton died. And he actually found errors in Newtonian physics and Leibnizian physics. And in the process of correcting their errors, he integrated Newton and Leibniz and laid the foundation for what is called quantum physics. long before quantum physics came into existence. And what he says is this: force is primary and matter is secondary. Matter follows force, and therefore form ever follows function. Because interactions of force have dynamic combinatory functions in the context of the whole, while form is emergent of matter with mass. It's very important to really conceptualize this. So the fundamental, whatever the fundamental is, it is force, no mass. So massless point of force interacting, which will probably appear to be more like a wave, which is a wave, is more primary than the particles with matter, mass. And you cannot see, you can see waves maybe, but you cannot see the force itself. So this Boscovich developed a dynamist conception, which was the predecessor of modern quantum field theory of the physical world as constituted by real, attractive, and repulsive, or contractive, expansive forces centered on non-extended, massless physical points of force. I say physical, but it's not really physical anymore. And contrary to Leibniz's monad, Boscovich's atom of force is completely homogeneous throughout the universe. So Boscovich imagines the universe as fundamentally consisting of massless points of force that only appear to us as sensible material objects with sensible qualities, owing to forces exerting force upon each other, or one another, throughout the entire universe. So sensing, perceiving, and conceiving are also complex interactions of force. So universe is a force field, and everything in the universe is connected. And force exists in itself. Force acts only on one another, but not on matter, as matter is an emergent property of force and interaction of force. So it is not that matter has force, or it is force is more primary. And you can actually mathematically identify how those forces interact. And forces exist in itself. So it is a Kantian things in itself is force. And Boscovich's work had a significant influence over the subsequent development of physics, notably in the work of such scientific luminaries as J.J. Thomson, Lord Kelvin, Ernst Rutherford, and Niels Bohr, especially in their formulation of the structure of atom, which is actually more like a borrowing the idea from Boscovich. Of those four, J.J. Thomson, Kelvin, and Rutherford studied Boscovich. Niels Bohr probably got that idea from his teacher, Rutherford. And one of the very famous formulation of Boscovich's theory is called Boscovich's curve, which has been actually confirmed and verified on different scales. However, Boskovich's name disappeared around the turn of the century, 20th century, completely. So now when you read any standard text on the history of science, his name doesn't show up. And another person, Walter Russell, who had no scientific background, had, when he was around the time of his 50th birthday, he had 39 days of cosmic illumination. And instead of writing Bhagavad Gita, he wrote a scientific treatise. And he did study Newtonian physics after he had this vision. And just like Boskovich, who actually studied Newton, he corrected Newton's mistakes based on his own vision. And it is very similar to Boskovich. Again, he basically says it is this dynamic force with patterns. That's a foundation of science. And if you just hear this as some mystics, vision, he actually identified many missing elements in the Mendeleev's table. And 4 elements he identified through his vision was later discovered by 4 physicists, all of whom got Nobel Prize for their discovery. So it is not just a mystical vision. It had actually scientific foundation. So Boskovich, who was a Jesuit priest, polymath, and scientist and mathematician, and Walter Russell, who was a spiritual teacher, artist, architect, musician, who had this vision, both came up with a scientific theory and vision, which was merging of science and spirituality, exteriority and interiority. And Rudolf Steiner says, the universe seen from without is light, and seen from within is thought. Nietzsche, who studied Boskovich, called interiority of force the will to power. So Nietzsche would say the universe seen from without is force, seen from within is will to power. And Walter Russell will agree with both of them. So dynamic interactive field of massless point of force is the ever-present first cause of reality, nature, universe, and cosmos. Existing science only deals with effect, matter, form. And what science calls cause is not real cause, but the effect that is ontologically or chronologically prior to other effects. So this monistic pandynamism expands the purview of science to include the real causative realm, real causation, while eliminating the demarcation between physics and the metaphysics and integrating the exterior, the interior. The cosmos as a monad, the world of experience in consciousness, which include abstract models of cosmos and the universe as the aggregate of all monads. That is a kind of new vision. As you know, Buckminster defined the universe as not the universe, as the aggregate of all humanities consciously apprehended and communicated, only partially overlapping non-simultaneous experiences. And each of those experiences I call monad. The universe is the aggregate of all those monads. And you can see in the world of experience, what we call this, I call now the field of force, is a foundation upon which the universe is built. This is a very complex subject, but I want to, in just putting together one thing I would like to say: this demarcation between metaphysics and the physics and materialistic foundation of science need to be overcome and will be overcome as the new kind of consciousness emerges and new kind of spirituality emerges. And Boschkovich, Russell, and to a degree Buckminster Fuller and Rudolf Steiner, many of those philosophers and scientists already identified the path toward that. And this will cure humans' estrangement from nature. And we will regain new kind of spirituality with new kind of scientific knowledge that hasn't been available in the last several centuries. And today we hear the term transhumanism, but original transhumanism, which was coined by Julian Huxley, who was the Aldous Huxley's brother, older brother, and grandson of the Thomas Huxley, who was a great friend and supporter of Charles Darwin. He coined this term, transhumanism, in the book published in 1958, exactly 200 years after Boschkovich's book was published. The title was Religion Without Liberation, in which he is foreseeing the new kind of humans emerging to whom spirituality and science are completely integrated. So, fundamental, one of the critical element of new spirituality, new consciousness, is exactly this: integration of interiority and exteriority, and scientific knowledge and spiritual knowledge into one philosophical movement of human thought. And this will be the foundation for new science. And if we involve mathematicians and young physicists who are not married to any particular paradigm, we will be able to develop a new kind of physics, which will integrate quantum physics and relativity theory, but in a different mathematical foundations. Should I continue?
Yasuhiko, this is very, very deep. So please continue.
Okay.
At any point, what I will do, this is so deep, I'm barely able to put all my mind around it. So what I will do is that please continue. Once you're done,
Yes.
take your time.
Yes.
And then I will try to summarize it in my own way, and then we will open it up for any questions.
Okay.
Right. But please take your time. This is beautiful. Go ahead.
So along the line of evolution of consciousness and evolution of new science, philosophy need to kind of evolve as well. And philosophy in the new age, in the new coming age, in a way, need to reclaim its own identity. And you and I spoke about, the origin of ancient Hindu caste system, which was not the class system, but it is a dimension of human potentials. And then so Brahmin is a priest, philosopher, sage, wisdom dimension. So in the future, in the near future, or actually now, people need to actually open up the dimension of philosophy within themselves. And philosophy should not be a specialized field. It should not be, in a way, profession almost. It should be a sign of being intelligent, thinking human. So we need to conceive of philosophy as such. It is an essential function of human consciousness and human mind. Asking questions and answering them. So philosophy is the whole spiritual intellectual activity of intelligent thinking human being founded upon the quest and questioning. Michael Oakeshott, who is a great British philosopher of 20th century, he says this: philosopher is not as such a scholar. And the philosophy, more often than not, has founders in learning. There is no book which is indispensable for the study of philosophy. To speak of a philosopher as ignorant is to commit an ignorio elenchi, which means logical fallacy of supposing a point proved or disproved by an argument, proving or disproving something not at issue. So to speak of a philosopher as ignorant is a mistake. A historian or a scientist may be ignorant. Philosophers may be stupid. So my ignorance is always excused, but I have no excuse for being stupid, and I'm trying my best not to be stupid here. As a part of the human beings being a philosopher, there will be new kind of a perspectivism. When we develop ourselves to be who we are, we develop unique perspective. So elimination of perspectives and trying to unify into one mega perspective is not the evolutionary path. But we each develop our cosmically unique perspective through which we understand and comprehend and understand the universe, which we share. It does not mean that you as a perspective is singular perspective. No, because you develop a transparadigmatic mind, you can hold within the cosmic perspective that is unique, different perspectives, which I call the omnicentric mind. This is actually a very complex subject. Maybe I shouldn't be getting into this too much. Yeah, maybe I'll stop here because it is too much here.
Okay.
I'm writing a book. And
yes. Go ahead.
yes, one more thing, just end. So I talked about the fundamental assumptions or foundations for new science or new cosmology, and the conception of philosophy as an essential aspect of being an authentic being, human being, and developing one's own unique perspective, which is all-inclusive. And one more thing about morality and ethics. And Buckminster says something very interesting here. In the beginning of the critical path, actually, the words good and bad are meaningless, since complementarity is essential to the success of eternally regenerative universe. The phenomenon identified as the opposite of positive cannot be negative, nor can it be bad, since the inter-opposed phenomena known heretofore as good and bad are essential to the 100% success of eternally regenerative universe. They are both good for the universe. Now, we have this morality, Christian morality, Buddhist morality, Confucian morality, and new model consciousness will free itself from this morality-based ethics. So inherent in the concept of morality is the concept of moral law, which is not knowledge, but command. The people who obey, the people who do what they are told to do, believe that what they are doing is what is right. And the people who do what they believe is right are obeying a moral law or command. Obedience implies belief, and belief implies obedience, and both imply external authority. A difference in moral belief and moral act of obedience is the difference in what or which external authority people follow. If the authority is external and one thought is a belief, there is no difference. One listens to one kind of authority, another listens to another kind of authority. If the authority is internal and one is thinking for oneself, it is not the moral command that one obeys, but it is the ethical knowledge and action that one attains and execute based on one's own ethnological experiment and experience in life. The ethical, ethnological knowledge never develops into a moral conviction, and hence one never becomes self-righteous and is always aware and cognizant of the possibility that one may be mistaken. An ethical person asks, what is the best or better course of action to take based on what one knows in a particular situation, not what is right or wrong. Ethics become more scientific in this way. So new ethics is what I call evolutionary ethics, where your action, your criteria of action is what is more conducive to the development of the whole within which you find yourself. And one of the critical elements in new ethics, evolutionary ethics, is bringing aesthetics into ethical consideration. And what is more beautiful, what is more whole, what is more evolutionarily conducive is what the action that one needs to take. So ethical thought and ethical action becomes more experimental and scientific in the sense that, you know, we define science today, and no longer command coming from outside. It is your own self-discovery and self-correction. So that's maybe an essence of new ethics, and then maybe we can have a conversation, and that's maybe the best way to unpack this, because I actually spoke about something that is being made in the book.
Wonderful. All right, Yasuhiko, I know that you know that I love conversations with you. You know, I've loved each and every one of the conversations, but this one is incredible. This is by far my favorite presentation.
Oh, really?
By you. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. So I'm barely able to, you know, I'm speechless. Okay, but I do believe in speaking the best as I understand. So what I want to do, just for the benefit of others who may not be as familiar with your thought, I want to try to kind of do a quick abstract or summary of what I heard, put it on the table, and then open it up for questions. May I do that?
Sure.
Okay. So, I mean, Yasuhiko covered a stunning range. You know, he gave us a tour of the evolution of consciousness, pointing out many eras and many movements. He talked about the current era, and he's looking forward to see what kind of consciousness is proper for it. So he started using Janes with the breakdown of the bicameral mind. And those people who are not familiar with Janes, please go ahead and read that, because it's important to understand when such a transition has happened in the past, because with the hindsight, you can actually see how these dramatic transitions happen, and it puts you in a better position to understand today. Again, I second the recommendation with Yasuhiko's recommendation, Merlin Donald's work. He came here multiple times. Merlin has been here and he's talked about that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
you know
fantastic work. So I definitely recommend that. That's another way. You have to slowly grasp that human beings have changed fundamentally. We are beings of self-made soul. We create ourselves. And by clearly understanding the past and how we've changed in the past, you can begin to see how we are changing in the present. So that's the first point. The first transition was, in the Axial Age. And there, Yasuhiko pointed out it is individual, rational, and this worldly. It was a big shift from being kind of passive puppets of God that you're just listening to and everything is working out, to saying that I, your analog I, is going to now, in your mental space, say what is likely to happen and plan your actions rationally. So move the focus to internal. So that was the transition in the Axial Age. He talked about the reaction to that. That is really beautiful point. Like Plato is a reaction to that. He's bringing back the old way of thinking under a new garb. So that's a reaction, in the direction of collectivism, primacy of kind of direct intuition, and otherworldliness. Yasuhiko also talked about a smaller version of that taking place in Renaissance, where Renaissance people are rediscovering this Axial Age, and a reaction to that of Reformation. Then I'm delighted that he brought in Louis Sullivan, form follows function, because ultimately for me, Louis Sullivan has been the most influential thinker for me. And that actually captures, the primacy of function, actually captures this entire issue beautifully. So reformation is changing of forms, but the function, not the function. So with that as a background, he laid out the problem of today's age. And he talked about three aspects of it. One is complexification of civilization. Things are enormously complex, and they're getting more and more complex all the time. Second, estrangement from nature. And third, loss of interiority. The tremendous advances we have made in changing the outside world, we have refused to focus on the interiority. So that is the problem. Those three things are the problem of the modern age. And then he talked about the solution, pointing to the solution. He talked about the works of people like Boscovich, Walter Russell, Rudolf Steiner, Nietzsche, who are pointing the way towards that. And he brought it together in his own inimitable way. And I see the echoes of many of the deep ideas of, for example, Bhagavad Gita, of Purusha and Prakriti, and the fundamentality of souls, of Atma, and relationship between Brahma and Atma, and that all of us have this, Atma in us. All of that I see as, comporting to what he's saying. So it was an amazing range of topics. And as you can imagine, this is only a beginning. This is a beginning of saying, okay, where are we, and what is this world, and what should we be doing? So it was just an amazing presentation. So thank you. Now let's open it up for questions. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to ask questions. Go ahead. Let's see here. I'm going to do unmute. All right, the first question is going to be, folks, don't be shy. You can either raise your hand in Zoom or type an exclamation mark to ask questions, and then Yasuhiko will answer the questions as you ask them. Try to keep your questions short, questions or comments short, so that Yasuhiko can address as many questions as we can. All right, so first question is from DLJ. DLJ, what's your question?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, thanks for the talk. Thanks also for the summary. It did actually clear up a couple of questions I was thinking of. So I'm a little bit stuck at the beginning because I think some of the definitions are not the way I'm using them. So could I have definitions, please, for three things, short as possible if you can. Evolution, I think you're not using that in the technical sense or not the sense I know it. Cosmic evolution, I'm completely lost with that one. And then I think, well, consciousness is the other one. So yeah, I'll put them in the chat. So as a summary, there you go. So evolution, cosmic evolution, and consciousness. Can I have the definitions for those? That'd be great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And Yasuhiko, if you want to talk about your view of definitions, you're welcome to do that as well. Please go ahead.
Okay. So notion of evolution is pretty universal. Long before Darwin and Huxley, Greek philosophers talked about it. And also Buddhist had its own definition. But here, evolution is a process in which an organism or a system gains greater and greater complexity, and also the higher and higher order. So as a human being, when we grow, we learn many different things, and we gain more and more knowledge. And if we have a unity amongst this knowledge, your mind is more evolved than 10 years ago, because your mind has a greater complexity and also higher order. And that applies to any organism or any systems. Cosmic evolution, that is Buckminster Fuller's term. He is not saying that cosmos evolves. The cosmic evolution means that evolution is taking place everywhere in the universe, and they are interrelated. So, for example, evolution of organisms on this planet, we don't think about the cosmic influences. And so the planet exists in the solar system, and solar system exists in the galaxy, and so on and so forth. And all the things that are taking place here in nature is connected to the larger cosmos. So evolution that is taking place on the planet, terrestrial evolution, can also be seen as a cosmic evolution. So cosmic evolution means evolution doesn't take place in the universe, and it has a cosmically connected to one another. And definition of consciousness is extremely difficult here, because it will be many people wrote a book about this subject. But I just want to say, consciousness is not the same as mind. And mind is a computational process that we have acquired. And consciousness is something more. And you see, consciousness. So there is a science, knowing. The consciousness is the movement of the whole that continuously unifies sciences. And mind is one element of the sciences, which is a computational process that can be duplicated and even improved by computer. But consciousness has something more than that. That more part is not a computational process. And what we call intelligence is the engine of our consciousness. And there are 4 levels or dimensions to this intelligence. and consciousness evolves as the dimensions expand. The original dimension, the fundamental dimension of intelligence is computational intelligence, information processing. And then next layer is intellection, what we call reason. Then next level is intuition in the imagination. And then finally, spiritual intelligence. So consciousness, some people's consciousness are basically stuck in the computation level, or it can be include interaction level. It can also expand with the intuition and imagination level, and then spiritual intelligence. And this becomes a holistic consciousness, holistic intelligence. And it is a consciousness because there's a way of knowing in the information computation level. There's a knowing that exists in the interaction level. There's a knowing at the level of intuition and also imagination. And there's a knowing in the level of spiritual intelligence. So consciousness is always this wholeness of this knowingness that exists in different level of intelligences. So that is my definition.
Wonderful. Thank you. Folks, if you have questions, go ahead and type exclamation mark. So I'm going to start with my questions. I have plenty of questions. So first one, Yasuhiko, you started talking about the characteristics of this new consciousness for the future. And the point that you focused on was this trans-paradigmic, multi-perspectival aspect of it. Are there other characteristics? Would you elaborate on the characteristics of the new
Let's see, not to forget. I actually listed many things and I didn't read all of it. Let me see, not to forget. Okay. So number one is, as I said, transparadigmatic and multi-perspectival. Second is transparadigmatic and multi-logical. And third is multi-narratization, multi-modeling. It's kind of a same thing seen different way. You see, being monological instead of multi-logical, people has one narratization. And when you see people arguing with each other, it's basically two different narratization claiming its own rightness and the wrongness of the other person, others, different model, different theories. And with this new transparadigmatic model, you can have actually you can do different narratization. And that is another aspect of this. And also, as I said many times, this is a ontological immersion. It requires beyond the mind. You see, you need to actually look, when we want to understand different culture, the best thing to do is you actually live there. Learn the language and eat the food. They eat. I lived in India for 3 years, and my understanding of Indian people and Indian culture has a real physical dimension. Eating Indian food with hands. Really, it is, and of course you cannot do it with every culture, but you can actually use your imagination to immerse yourself ontologically in a different paradigm. That is another ability.
Sure.
Yes, and then one more thing is it is the omnicentricity of the mind, as I was saying. So you can actually have so-called contradictory perspectives, not just two. You can hold them in your mind. And that is a very unique ability that will develop. And some people have already developed it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll next go to Laura. And then I have one more question about Bhagavad Gita. We've been going through chapter 13. So I want to talk about how what you're saying relates to chapter 13 of relationship between kshetra, which is the field or the context, and kshetrajna, the knower of the field. But let's go with Laura first. Laura, what's your question? Oh, just a second. Sorry. Go ahead. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Well, you sort of answered one right now about the transferability, but and also the fact that you can have more than one thing in your head. My other question here was when with education of how does this fit with our way we educate our children? You know, is there some, because the models that we currently have involving curriculum include nothing that relates to this at all. So you have to blow up the educational system, which would be fine. But
Yes.
we have no one in our current culture who could teach anything relating to any of this. We have miles to go.
Yes.
And so I don't see any of this coming in any, future age, with any rapidity. 2050 wouldn't even be, I think, possible, quite honestly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Yasuhiko.
So,
Well, we are just in the beginning of this breakthrough. Breakdown has already taken place, and now we are in the process of breakthrough. And education, you see, the whole of human culture or human society or civilization and problems that arises in there are interconnected. So the problem of education cannot be separated from other problems that exist in economics, politics, and consciousness as such. So to change education, actually to change, you need to change everything. Having said that, what we can do today, one of the things that happened after World War II is the destruction of family. And we need to regain family again. And it may be different from the family we used to have before World War II. Like in Japan, you had a grandparents, parent, and kids. And parents, usually mother stayed home, but they went out to work, and grandparents at home. So grandparents kind of taught kids. The grandparents made a lot of mistakes being parents. So they have learned something about child rearing. So they may be better at educating kids than the parents, although they are farther away from the new consciousness from the baby. But anyway, it has been destroyed. First, it became a nuclear family, and nuclear family parents are divorcing and all kinds of things. Now we need to create that kind of structure again, where child is looked after by people who have wisdom. And so today, homeschooling is kind of moving in that direction. And then the people need to begin to change in the community itself. Community need to become educational learning community, which means everybody is learning. And in that, kids are being taught, number one. Number two, what they need to teach fundamentally is how to become an autodidact. That self-initiating, self-teaching human being. So what is important is to really pay attention to the questions the kids are asking. So it requires an enormous amount of time. The people need to spend time with the kids. Also, another thing about this is that people don't usually talk about this, but today, because of the medical science advance, kids don't get the benefit of mother's milk. And also when they are born, sometimes, doctors' convenience, they don't go through the birth canal. You see, once we have, I don't know if I'm sure you have seen, but when you see the child being born, it is really amazing thing. It is a nature. You can see nature. It is all men are created equal right there in nature. And the baby goes through the birth canal to get all kinds of things from mother, and then get the mother's milk to get all kinds of things. Child become healthier and more intelligent if they go through this process. So also we need to bring kids back from the very beginning of the conception, closer to nature than it exists today. So my suggestion is really a group of people coming together to create a community, do an experimentation on this. So that's the shortest answer.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Andrew. Andrew, go ahead.
Hello. I just typed the question about the best approach to connect spirituality with science. But I notice science people, they have more often left brain more developed for the science, since the right brain looks like have more connection with spirituality and imagination. I know Roger Boskowitz was a good example. He was a philosopher and scientist, but very often in our real life, where we have little lower consciousness, our scientists mainly focus on science, not something else like spirituality. How we can challenge this, like develop brain, left and right part of the brain, to challenge this and make it work better and consciousness like have on the higher level.
Yes. So the bicameral mind was right brain centered. The left brain was subservient to a right brain. And one of the things that happens with the new consciousness, which is our consciousness, is that it became more like a unicameral mind. And left brain was given an opportunity to really claim its own independence capability. And it overdid its job. And many of us became left brain centered instead of being unicameral. And so one of those materialistic scientism is one manifestation of the left brain predominance. So what is important is obviously to really bring the two hemispheres together in a harmonious way. When two comes together in a harmonious way, what Buckminster calls synergy takes place. And instead of fighting with each other, there may be something that is from the unicameral mind, something happens. Now, the spirituality of right hemisphere is a spiritual of bicameral mind. And even after the birth of consciousness, the spirituality retained that bicamerality. And we have the organized religion. And any intelligent person can no longer actually buy into the dogma that was taught in churches and temples. left brain cannot accept this right brain centered religion anymore. However, if you have a spirituality which only arises through the harmony between left and right brain, holistic brain centered consciousness and religion or spirituality, then left brain can accept. And that is exactly what Julian Huxley tried to do with this transhumanism, which was taken over by the left brain centered people. And it became the techno transhumanism. I highly recommend you read his book, Religion Without Liberation. So here was the great scientist, one of the leading biologists and evolutionary biologists of his time, who made a tremendous contribution. He actually saw the limitation of the science. He saw the limitation of the science and limitation of the spirituality, religion. And he tried to combine them both, and he called this transhumanism. Now, one of the ways to actually, interesting thing is this. Some leading scientists are actually very spiritual. People who are extremely intelligent can see the limitation of human intelligence better than those people who are not that intelligent. The people who are highly logical can see the limit of logic. Wittgenstein and Kurt Gödel, they saw the logic limitation. So there are many scientists, really leading scientists I have met personally, are actually clearly aware of the limitation of this materialist-based science. So what is needed is to change the language of spirituality and start to develop spiritual philosophy, which actually incorporate scientific development. Some people have done that with the quantum physics, but it is those people who are writing those books are either ignorant of quantum physics or ignorant of spirituality. I haven't seen anybody who really fully integrating them. So we want to, do this. So I think it is possible, and I think it is happening. And I highly recommend this Religion Without Liberation by Julian Huxley, 1958, written a long time ago.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Yasuhiko. So let me go to my question about how does the metaphysics that Boskowitz, Walter Russell, Rudolf Steiner, Nietzsche are talking about, how does it relate to the metaphysics in Bhagavad Gita of Purusha and Prakriti?
Okay. In order to integrate the ancient teachings with contemporary teachings, in the process, we need to transmute ancient teachings. So there are two ways of reading those ancient texts. Ontologically immersing yourself in the mind of those people who have written them, who are not scientifically informed.
Yes.
And accepting their fundamental cosmology as it is, and get the benefit out of this teaching. Or you really need to redefine those words in light of the contemporary science. So, and when you re-language it or redefine them, it is no longer the teaching original teaching.
Yes.
So that's my,
Wonderful.
one possible answer.
Mhm.
And second answer is, okay, so if we redefine those words in light of what we know today. So Bhagavad Gita was, written at least 300 years before Christ. Yes, maybe, and it come much before. With it, but probably it was after the breakdown of the Bicameral mind.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So they had fundamentally same kind of consciousness that we have today.
Yes.
But they were not informed of the scientific discoveries we have today. And here's the thing. So as you know, I have developed a new monadology from entirely different from Leibniz monadology. Leibniz monadology was monad was an atom with individuality, which was disproven. Now, what I call monad is actually your world. So every moment of our lives, we are experiencing. And the world that shows up in your consciousness is the world of your experience. In fact, it is you. You are the world. That world is the monad that you are. And it has no window, same as the Leibniz, because I cannot experience your experience and you cannot experience my experience. It is a singular world in the whole history of the universe. It disappears when you die. It came into existence and continued to be evolving since you were born, and then it will disappear. And when we say interior and exterior, the spirituality being interiority, or consciousness being interiority, and then external world, we normally think of interior like here, and the exterior. But from the perspective of new monadology, this is my interior. You are inside of me, Laura is inside of me, Frank is inside of me, David is inside of me, and Brian is inside of me, the rest of the people who are on this call. That is inside. Then when you study the universe, you are studying the universe in two ways. As Buckminster says, experience is the raw material of science. So everything that shows up in my experience is the raw material. And it is inside my consciousness. And we study. Now, when we study, we use language, mathematics, whatever, and begin to understand this universe, yes? In that process, we begin to think of the universe that is outside of this monad. Obviously, you are there, so there's a world of monad right there, and my monad. And there is a universe that contains all of this. And we can only have an access to that universe through abstraction. Or go deep in your model, deep, and enter to the 0 point. When you become at one with the 0 point, you become at one with the infinite. That point is the same point that exists outside of the universe. Now, at the core of the Atman, you become at one with the Brahman. But knowledge that you develop is not a knowledge that Bhagavad Gita shares or Brahma Sutra shares, Dogen shares, because their language is the language of this monad, entirely experiential. So they know Atman, they know Brahman in the monad. Today, that's possible. At the same time, through the conceptual abstraction, we can actually formulate the interaction amongst all the monad and everything else that exists in the universe, which is only possible through thinking. That was not there in the past spirituality. Then you can actually redefine Brahma differently.
Beautiful.
Yes, and that's our future, and that is a integration of science and spirituality right there.
Wonderful. Let me ask a follow-up question. It's a very simple question. What is happening when two people are interacting? You're going and getting coffee at Starbucks, and you talk to the person at Starbucks. Can you describe the interaction?
So you see, in your mind, you have a model of two people who are going to. So you see, as you are experiencing this, two things are happening. So somebody showing up in your monad, and then we are showing the Starbucks coffee is showing up in monad. That's an experience, yes. Okay. And then there's a narration going on where it is externalized. There's a you and me inside the Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And we are talking using language. And because, we tend to have a same language to speak about, when I don't think you can have many different paradigms in two people being in Starbucks together. It's basically we have a shared narrative. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we can have a conversation. We are concurrently going the same model going on in your head. But to understand the person, human being, is to understand the monad. That's a very profound experience. And only way to experience that is through the ontological immersion, which is, you see, right now you're a picture in my on my screen, yes. Mm-hmm. But I imagine you as a human being right there, and I see as your object in a normal sense, yes. Mm-hmm. But when you have the trans-paradigmic mode of mind and consciousness, and you can ontologically immerse, you become a portal, not a window or not an object, but you become a portal, and you enter. I can enter into you. Of course, it is. And I get to know you more profoundly than any other way. So, two people going to Starbucks and having just a conversation, you don't need to do that. But to understand the other human being, you need to do the ontological immersion, which becomes possible to the consciousness in which other human shows up as a portal into that monad.
Wow. Wonderful. I have one more question. It is very interesting, especially Boskowitz. Looks like he has profound thoughts, yet he's not known. Mm-hmm. And some of the other names that you mentioned also are in the same category.
Yes.
So it's very interesting that these people are not known. What do you make of that?
Well, for example, if we were to really study the history of knowledge and philosophy and the consciousness of the West, and I can actually say two thinkers at the foundation of modern age: Giordano Bruno and Baruch Spinoza. No books I have read says that. Bruno was burnt at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
And Spinoza also remained, was ostracized from the mainstream. We have same situation with Boscovich. Originally, he was a part of the mainstream. He was a Jesuit priest and professor of universities. Toward the end of his life, he began to, because his cosmology is different from the Christian cosmology, the more he shared it, the less, the more marginalized he became. And toward the end of his life, he was very poor. And he had to work so hard to just, make his living that he died young. So it's always the case. Ideas, you see, actually ideas move the world. But the ideas that move the world is never the finest idea. It is usually the second-rate, third-rate ideas, because that's how the masses can understand. And that's how the power structure of the world uses an ideology to control and manipulate the masses. So Spinoza's, Bruno's ideas and Spinoza's ideas become diluted and somehow became understandable to the masses. Boscovich's, part of the Boscovich idea has been popularized through quantum physics. And Walter Russell was completely outside of the mainstream science to begin with. He has never been a scientist. He hasn't even gone to school to study science. But Boscovich was a highly formally educated person, plus a genius. Walter Russell was a genius, but never went to school, an artist. So finest ideas are usually not come to the surface. You go back to the Greek time, Epicurean philosophy is probably more Aristotelian than Aristotle himself, but it was so purely, this worldly and scientific that the Christians, theologians were not able to integrate it, so it was dismissed.
Wow. Excellent, thank you. Next up is going to be David. David, go ahead.
Yes, thanks very much. I wanted to follow up on the wonderful question that Shrikant asked just previous to this, and your wonderful answer, that in a recent conversation between John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson, they were talking about the meaning of love, and that love, in part of their definition, was being able to hold another person in your mind, be able to truly understand what that other person would be contributing to in the mind. And then we were, in another conversation we were expanding that out into this concept of religion, where in both Matthew and in Deuteronomy, it's talking about you shall love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your spirit. And this concept of also having Jesus or God or whatever, and that meaning of God as a idealized pinnacle of this hierarchy, that your love for the God isn't just serving or being part of, but having that entity within you as well. And I was curious about your comments of that in terms of love and what you were talking about just previously about conversation and holding these monads and having these people interact, and how that would relate to religion and philosophy in your framework.
Well, the love has so many different definitions and meanings. And whatever I say about love is only in the context of conversation that we are having. So, just like God, in a way, God is, love is an overused word, really. And almost like what love means is whatever the people make it mean. So what Jordan Peterson said, or the Bible says, what are they saying? How we understand what they're saying without using the word love at all? So just put the word love aside and just get the meaning of what they're saying. That's, to me, very interesting question. So love is the capacity to, or act of holding other people. Yes, that's what they said. So what does it mean to hold other people? What it requires? What requires you to hold somebody, some people in your consciousness? What does it mean? What does it take? And maybe love is that which it takes for you to do that, yes? So what is it? I'm asking.
Well, their conception is a matter of being able to create another space in one's own consciousness that, not just a superego or something else, but to be able to imagine and have that voice, even if the person's passed on, of what that person mental model would be to be able to advise you, and then being able to take that not just for human beings, but similarly for whether you want to call it God or Jesus or something else. If you're loving God and if you have this commandment to love God, it's not just a matter of, happy, as you're saying, there's so many definitions, but love God in terms of having this introject of this idealized human being or God or whatever, not just this critical superego, but having this idealized object that not just like your father or mother or uncles or friends as an introject, but having this idealized pinnacle of the hierarchy that's also that you're loving it and you're taking it in and making space in your body, in your consciousness, in your mind, to be able to advise you and knowing, oh, this is what my father would say, this is what Jesus would say. This is what, if everybody is Jesus, if you interact with everybody as if they were Jesus or God, as idealized thing, this is the idealized way that our interaction would be. And this is what, and to have that and to love God, to love Jesus is to incorporate that, to make space for that in your mind and be able to hold that and understand, separate from your own ego and your own actions, this is what this idealized human being or God, however you want to interpret it, would do.
So to hold somebody or some ideas in your consciousness requires that you have a sustained attention to that person or that idea. Sustained attention. What makes somebody sustain attention? Or you can say this: you have like a tremendous, you place tremendous value on that person, so that without the existence of that person, you actually don't exist. It's almost like your existence is coextensive with the existence of that person, missing of whom is no longer you existing. So it is like a intense interest. Yes. So in order for me to be like, my wife is always in my consciousness, all that. And if she is not there, my existence will be fundamentally altered. And my monad will change completely. Also, there are few things, not the person, but few things that are so important to me that no existence of which will alter my existence. So from that sense, what we call love is the recognition of the essential importance of a people and ideas without whose existence there is no meaning to your own existence. But what kind of consciousness will have that kind of love? So is love a cause or love as an emergent property coming from this? Do you need to have a love to do that? Or maybe this will generate love. This is like this is you call love, but it is something else underneath. Oftentimes we, function and form switches. Is love function or form? And oftentimes there's an inversion of, form and function. So I think it is more useful for us to really see love as function.
Yes.
Yes. So what kind of function is love? And in the cosmic sense, it is a function of forces interconnecting. And Boschkovich has when you look at the, depending on the distance, sometimes it is more attraction, and then sometimes more repulsion. So love is that connection which has the repulsion and attraction at that level. So presence of love tells us that poetically the fundamental interconnection of everything in the universe. And those who you love more are closer, not just physically, but metaphysically.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Yasuhiko. That was brilliant. Next up is Aware. Aware, go ahead.
Thank you, Shekar. I was listening to your description of love, and I was reminded of the concept of Ubuntu, the idea of the collective being engaged with one another, and how it defines that love because of the engagement. I am because you are. Ubuntu is a South African tradition, very old in its nature, but it describes that congruence of a community based on my care and my obligation to the other rather than myself. And then I build out of that obligation. I just wanted to know if you were aware of the concept or if it's something new to the group.
I have never heard of this before, but what I like about this concept is it is a collective, ground up. So there's an actual, deep rapport between people, and this rapport build a community collective, which is different from collectivism, an idea which is the top down. They say collective has a more value than the individual.
Mhm.
Therefore, you need to subjugate yourself to the collective. In this way, the collective is an abstraction. Individual is real. So real has to subjugate itself to the abstraction. That's the collectivism. But your collective is actually collective that comes from the deep, profound connection between people, and it is built. So in that sense, I like that concept very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Yasuhiko. Yasuhiko, this was amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm sure this is a beginning of something really, really magnificent. So really look forward to talking to you and interacting with you as you develop this. Thank you very much. And thank you for all your questions, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.